over your life? Have you ever sat and wondered what happened to all the goals that I had planned? What happened that everything that I had wrote down on my board hasn't come true? You know, different generations had different goals. So if we think about my grandmother's generation, we might think about if she is planning her life, she's planning to get married, have children, be a stay-at-home wife and mother, because back in that day, women didn't work. It was their job to take care of the children and the home. But then if we look at my mother's generation, they too, as women, planned to get married, have children, but they may have also planned to work outside the home. Now there were certain jobs that were available to women of that generation. It would have been teachers, secretaries, nurses. But then if we move on to my generation, we had got to the point where we would sit down and we'd write everything out. By the age of 17, I would have my driver's license. By the age of 25, I'll be graduated from college, ready to get married and settle down and have children. By the time I'm 30, my husband and I would buy our own home. By the time I was 60, I'd be ready for retirement. All those things we used to plan out. But those were goals that we set for ourselves. And sometimes the goals that we set for ourselves aren't the goals that are meant for us. We might sit and think what is best for us, and then when it doesn't work out, we're surprised. But let me say this. God has a divine plan for each and every one of us.
Amen.
And the plan that He has for us will work out.
Yes, it will.
Now, God doesn't always say that by this age, this is what's going to happen. All God says is, this is what I have for you to do. And when God tells you He has something for you to do, you better believe that it's going to happen.
Amen.
Amen? So if we look at the life of Sarah, in her generation, it was normal that you would get married. Most of the time you would get married young. You would have children. You would take care of the home, your children, and your husband. Sometimes you even took care of the livestock or the garden. But one thing that was important to that generation was that they had children. Mainly that they would have sons. So our focus this morning is going to be on verses 9 through 14, even though we have read 4 through 14. Amen?
Amen.
So if we look at verses 9 and 10, we're going to discover why we don't count God out. Verses 9 and 10 read, "And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee when the season cometh around. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard in the tent door which was behind him." Point number 1, don't catch part of God.
Amen.
The question is, where is your wife? Now this leads me to believe that Sarah was not the intended recipient of what was about to be said. It seems that Sarah was ear hustling. Sarah was in the tent behind Abraham, dipping in the conversation. Amen?
Amen.
When you are dipping in someone's conversation, you only catch part of the information. Now me, I'm not good at ear hustling. I don't have a lot of hearing in this ear, so I know if I try to, I'm going to get everything wrong. However, I do have a mother who has that super hearing. She can even hear several conversations going on at the same time. But again, no matter how good you are at it, if you are not part of the conversation from the beginning, you are only going to get a part of it. Now last year, several of us went to Kansas for the convention. At one point, Deacon Hodge and I were sitting outside at a table, minding our own business, doing what we women do best. We were talking about the soap operas. So we were talking about, you know, all the affairs that were going on and whose husband left who and who did this to whom and all that kind of stuff. So we're just sitting there talking. So a group of women come out, sat at a table near us. Now they were a part of the education that was going on inside. Part of their assignment was to come outside or to go somewhere quiet and just pray for each other and pray for things that were going on. So these women were supposed to be sitting there praying. These women are dipping in on our conversation. They're hearing us talk about who slept with who, who's going to divorce who, and who did what. Now, if that wasn't enough, when they went inside, they was telling everybody else about this poor woman whose husband was fooling around. They were so heartbroken over what they thought was real that they just couldn't stand it. I mean, you could look at them and they were visibly upset about what they thought was going on. That's what happens when you're not a part of the conversation. So again, Sarah was not the intended person for this conversation. Sarah was dipping. She did not know what had already been said. She was just listening to a conversation that was going on. When God has something for us, it is for us. Amen. When God tells you the plans He has for you, He will make it plain. You don't have to lean out of the tent only to catch part of what He has to say. What God says, God means, God will do. Amen. That's all you have to count on. If God said it, I believe it, and it's true. Amen? So let's move on to point number 2. Know that time belongs to God. Verse 11 says, Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. In other words, Sarah had stopped having her cycle. Okay? Now our finite minds would have us convinced that we are too old to do what God has called us to do. Satan will whisper in our ears that God can't use us because we're old. The people who love you will talk about you behind your back. God didn't really tell you to write a book. You're too old. God didn't tell you to go back to school. You're too dumb. God didn't tell you this. God didn't tell you that. Our human nature would have us to follow a certain timeline. Just as I said in the beginning, we would put times on our life. At this point, this is what I should be doing. At this point, this is what I should be doing. At this point, this is what I should be doing. How many know that we serve a God that sits high and looks low? He knows your beginning and your ending even before you know it. So God doesn't have a timeline that He's following. If God says this is what He has for you to do, Don't let anybody talk you out of it because you reach a certain age. Don't let anybody tell you you're too old, you're too dumb, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're a drug addict. Don't let anybody talk you out of it, because what you're going to end up doing is giving away the blessing that God has for you.
Yes, amen.
God said He has this for you to do. Believe it. But you also need to wait until God tells you this is your time.
Yes.
Sometimes when we're younger, we have a vision. And we're ready. And when I'm saying younger, I'm saying in our teens, early 20s or whatever. And God has shown us what it is He wants us to do. Well, we're so ready to run out and do it, we haven't waited for the process to take place. God has to prepare us for where He's going to take us. God doesn't always just pick us up and put us in this place and say, there you go, I prepared you, I'm done with you. That's not the kind of God that we serve. God takes you step by step into the destiny that He has for you. We know that God moves when we don't expect Him to. While we're sitting back worrying about the time clicking, God's just sitting there saying, just wait. Not yet. It's coming. Nope, nope. Don't step out. Just wait. Just wait. I got you. I got this. And then when He says it's time, you're already prepared. You have nothing to worry about, nothing to fear. Time belongs to God. God will let you know when the time is right to do what you are called to do. Amen?
Amen.
So don't mess up your blessing by stepping out of line. Now, some people would say, stay in your lane. Every time I try to be kind of in the younger generation, my family laughs at me. So they told me I could not use the words fleek. They told me I could not use the word tune up because I called it turn it up. See, I'm still saying it wrong. It's turn up. See, that's why they tell me I can't use this. So maybe what I can say is I'm just keeping it 100 flat out. Did I get that one right? But anyway, all we need to do is keep praying, keep waiting, and keep trusting. Your time will come because God made the promise to you. So we might sit around and say, well, you know, I thought I would be married by now. I'm hitting 50, maybe even the middle of 50, and Mr. Right just hasn't come along. Would you rather wait for God's time or get into a situation that is not going to work? Just because the clock says, oh, you getting old. Ain't nobody gonna want you now. You over 50 and you've never been married. You know what? If God says that He has someone for you, He will provide that person for you when the time is right. Trust in what God promised you. See, Sarah didn't believe in the promise. Sarah was stuck on the fact of how old she was and how old Abraham was. She couldn't get past that because that's the normal thing that human beings do. We look at timelines. But again, time belongs to God. So then if we look again at verse 11, where again it says, now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Don't get caught in the usual. The usual would tell us you can't have a child because you no longer have a cycle. We know that on average, women between the ages of their late 40s or 50s begin to stop having their cycles. Okay? So if you're like me, you would have been happy about it because you don't have to worry about having no more kids. I believe at this point Sarah had gave up on having kids. Now we already know, because I already know y'all going to go backwards. And y'all going to talk about how Sarah had set up Hagar to have the child and everything. That is not the promise that God gave. God told Abraham that you would have a son with your wife, Sarah. And then when he repeats that while Sarah is leaning out the tent dipping, she still doesn't believe it. Her first thought is, we are old, well stricken in our years. I no longer have a cycle. How in the world is that going to happen? It would have been expected that they had children years ago. When it didn't happen, she gave up on her dreams. If all we do is live in the usual, we would never understand how God works. When God gives you a promise, there is no one or no thing that can stop it from coming true. Amen. Sarah was past the age of having children. She believed that her time was past, but God made a promise that she would have a son. All Sarah needed to do was stand on God's promise, believing that he would do what he said he would do. God does not work in the usual, but rather he works in supernatural ways that we can't explain. We need to believe that if God said it, then that's enough. Just hold on to the promise and watch God work. Point number 4, be careful even to yourself. Verse number 12 says, and Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? Now, if I use my imagination, I would think that Sarah may have even gone through bouts of depression over the years. She probably blamed herself for not being able to give her husband children. She may have been the talk of the community, the laughing stock. After all, Abraham was a wealthy man. He had stock. He had servants. He would have been considered a pretty good catch. But here he was, saddled with a woman that was barren. As the years went by, I think that Sarah dogged herself on a regular basis. I think she would look around at all the other women who were having children, and she would say, I just wasn't worthy enough to have a child for my husband. I just couldn't do the one thing that's expected of me, which was to produce children. I'm sure Sarah's confidence sunk to an all-time low. We must be careful about how we speak about ourselves. If we are speaking negatively about ourselves, then what do we expect others to do? Say that again. If we're saying, I'm too old, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, what do you think others are saying? They're just corroborating what you have already said. So we need to be careful, even unto ourselves. She laughed at the thought of having a son as old as they were. How many of us laughed about the call that God put on our lives? He can't be talking to me. Why in the world would God call me to do this? Doesn't he know that I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm not this, I'm not that? God knows everything about you. He knows every hair on your head. He knew you before the foundation of the earth. Don't you think God knows what he's doing when he calls you? Yes. He doesn't need you to explain to him who you are, what you can and can't do. God said, this is the promise that I have for you. I'm going to prepare you, I'm going to equip you, and you will be able to do what I've called you to do. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't talk yourself out of a blessing. If God says we're worthy, who are we to disagree? He knows us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. We just need to trust in God's promise and not in what we think our abilities are. So in order not to count God out, Don't catch part of God. No time belongs to God. Don't get caught in the usual. Be careful even to yourself. And point number 5, know God is limitless. Voice 14 says, is anything too hard for Jehovah? At the set time I will return unto thee when the seasons cometh around, and Sarah will have a son. God is the God of the impossible. When it looks like all hope is gone, don't count God out. Many of you, well, maybe not many of you, know that I have my house up for sale. Now, as long as I've lived at that house, there is a deadbolt on the front door that does not lock. It has not locked for 20 years. Someone was able to lock the lock so that nobody could get in and see the house. So I went over to the house and I started fiddling with the lock. Can't get it to open. I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm trying. Just won't open. It's getting hot outside. I'm standing at the door sweating. I went and sat in the car, turned the air on, and I started praying. I said, Lord, this is your house. If you want people to be able to get in and see it, I need you to unlock this door. I'm trusting you. I'm believing you. I know that this is your will. So I get out, and I go to the door, and I put the key in the deadbolt lock, and it just turns just as easy. And I lock the door. So I said, thank you, God. God is God of the limitless. Yes. But that's not true today. A couple weeks later, I get a call. There's someone there to see the house, but they can't get in. The deadbolt is locked. I said, but I put duct tape over that so nobody could lock it. They said they couldn't get the bottom part to lock, so they took off the duct tape and they locked the deadbolt. Now mind you, for 20 years, this bolt will not lock from the outside. When you go in at night, then you lock it. But you can't unlock it. Well, you couldn't lock it or unlock it from the outside. So here I go traipsing over to the house again. I'm thinking, it opened before. All I got to do is put the key in here and turn it. I put the key in there and the key wouldn't do anything. So I went back to my car and I sat down. I said, Lord, you did it before. I know you can do it again. I need you to unlock this door so I can get in this house. I went back to the lock, tried it, wouldn't unlock. I'm trying and trying and it won't unlock. So I go back and sit in the car. I said, Lord, did you hear me? I need to get in this house. I know this house is yours, but you let me have it for all these years. Now it's time to let it go. I believe the last time you had it locked, because those weren't the people for the house. But Lord, I need you to help me to unlock this door. I go back to the door, put the key in there, it still won't unlock. Now, I was there almost 3 hours trying to get the door unlocked. But I kept going back to the car and kept praying. So I went back to the car again and I sat there and I turned the air on high because again that was another hot day and I was just sweating. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what's going on here? I know that God answers prayers. He did it before, why won't he unlock this door for me? So I said, Lord, Satan is trying to make me think that this door is not going to unlock, not going to unlock. But I trust you. Once again, Lord, I need you. I need you right now to help me unlock this door. I got out the car, stuck the key in there and unlocked it.
Amen. He does it. We got trust him.
So you better believe I went to the side door and unlocked everything. Again, God is limitless. You know, we don't have to wait for the big things to ask God about. The little things, they may not be important to you, but that month was important to me. And I had to talk to God about it and let him know I needed him right then. I needed him to let me into that house. God is the God of the impossible.
Yes, he is.
But you know what? You don't have to believe my story and what he's done with me in the lock. You may not even be able to relate to Sarah and the fact that she was up in age and still gave birth to the son that was promised. But if just for a moment I could call on a few witnesses. If I could, I'd call on Noah just for a moment. Now everybody was telling Noah, it ain't gonna rain. We in the desert. You must be crazy. Why in the world would you build this big boat to just sit in the desert? But Noah didn't count God out. God told Noah to build the ark. Noah trusted God for what God said because God promised him, you and your family I will save. Build the ark. We got to stop letting people talk us out of what God told us. We have to trust God said it. It is for me. I'm going to be obedient. But you know what? Not just Noah. If I could interview Joseph just for a moment, I'm sure he would tell you the story of being thrown in the pit and left to die. But he didn't count God out. He remembered the promise of God that he would rule over his family. It didn't happen right away. Joseph had to go through the preparation process. Joseph may have believed it was more than enough to be brought up out of that pit. But God had made him a promise. Coming up out of the pit was not the end of it. He had to come out of the pit to get to the palace. But then, what would Moses say to us today? Moses would say, when God called me to deliver the children out of Egypt, I told God, not me. I don't talk very well. I have a stutter. But God said, Moses, this is what I have for you to do. I will prepare you for what I have called you to do. Moses was not a young man, but God had a call on his life. We are the recipients of that call. Amen? But you know, that's all well and good. We have Noah to look back on. We have Joseph. We have Moses. But as I prepare to be seated, I have to tell you about one more person who didn't count God out. There is a man named Jesus who has a story to tell. I believe he would tell you he knew before the foundation of the world that he would be called to save the world from sin. Although he knew it, it didn't happen right away. Jesus would say, I had to come through 42 generations before the promise could be fulfilled. But I trusted in my Father. He is limitless in time. He is limitless in what he can do. And he is limitless in your life. And your will be done. Don't count out God when family, friends, haters, and time tries to tell you you're too old or it's too late. God gave you a promise and it will come to fruition. Amen.